Why did Ann-Margret wait until 84 to finally reveal the truth about why she never married Elvis Presley? After decades of whispers and speculation, she broke her silence about their fiery connection, the choices that defined her future, and the soulmate she could never call her husband. Stay with us as we uncover the revelations that changed how fans see the love story between Elvis and Ann-Margret. The spark that lit Las Vegas. It was 1963 when Hollywood decided to blend two bright stars into one sizzling movie. The project was Viva Las Vegas, a film meant to showcase Elvis Presley at the height of his fame. Producers wanted a leading lady who could keep pace with his charisma, someone magnetic enough to match the king of rock and roll scene for scene. They found her in Ann-Margret, a Swedish-born actress and dancer who had already caught America's attention with her fiery performances. When she walked onto that set for the first time, the spark was not just cinematic, it was explosive. From the start, onlookers sensed something unusual. Elvis was used to commanding attention, yet Ann-Margret met his gaze with equal intensity. Cameras rolled, but even the crew whispered that the chemistry was more real than scripted. What was supposed to be just another musical comedy quickly turned into a collision of personalities that neither of them could ignore. Their rehearsals, dance sequences, and duet recordings were infused with a tension that was impossible to hide. Ann-Margret was not intimidated by Elvis. She was different from many of his co-stars. Where others deferred to his status, she challenged him playfully. He admired her fearlessness, while she admired his charisma. Rumors began to spread even before the movie hit theaters. Photographers who visited the set noted that the two often disappeared together between takes, leaving the press hungry for gossip. The entertainment press latched onto the idea of them as a glamorous pair, dubbing her the female Elvis. But there was more beneath the surface. The resemblance between their stage personas was striking. Both relied on raw energy, sensual movements, and a deep love for music. Watching them together in musical numbers like Come On Everybody gave audiences the impression of a perfectly matched duo. What the audience did not see was the private laughter, the inside jokes, and the moments between rehearsals where the line between performance and reality blurred. At the time, Ann-Margret was at a pivotal point in her career. Born Ann-Margret Olsen in Sweden and raised in Illinois, she had built her reputation as a performer who blended European glamour with American vitality. Her breakout had come in Bye Bye Birdie in 1963, which showcased her ability to electrify audiences with both voice and movement. For Elvis, who had already conquered the music charts and was juggling his film career, she was the first woman on set who mirrored his intensity rather than merely complimenting it. Las Vegas itself became a character in their story. The neon lights, the casinos, and the atmosphere of risk mirrored the energy between the two stars. They were living in the city of chance, and every encounter felt like rolling the dice. People around them knew that something beyond acting was unfolding. Some crew members even admitted years later that the acting between Elvis and Ann-Margret looked far too authentic to be staged. Their spark was undeniable, but it was also dangerous. Hollywood had seen many on-set romances before, but few between two stars of this magnitude. Elvis was already tied emotionally elsewhere, and Ann-Margret was aware of the whispers. Yet, in those early days, neither seemed willing to resist the magnetism. They laughed easily, leaned into each other on and off camera, and left an impression so powerful that decades later, the story of Viva Las Vegas is remembered less for its plot than for its leading pair. That spark was the beginning of something that would both define and haunt them. A single film set in the City of Lights had created an entanglement that neither fame nor silence could erase. But how do two people who seem destined for each other begin to realize they are also destined for conflict? Stay with us to uncover the details. Two souls, one mirror, different destinies. It often happens that the people who reflect us most clearly are the ones who challenge us the deepest. For Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret, their similarities were breathtaking but also unsettling. Both were born outsiders to Hollywood glamour, he from Tupelo, Mississippi, she from Valsjöben, Sweden, and both carried within them the hunger to captivate audiences. Yet the way they translated that hunger into life choices could not have been more different. Elvis lived in a world framed by Southern traditions and values. Fame had not stripped him of his upbringing. He believed in loyalty, commitment, and, perhaps most importantly, in the expectations placed on him by the people who managed his career. To him, a wife was meant to be supportive, steady, and present. Ann-Margret, however, carried the fire of ambition that could not be easily dimmed. She was not content to stand in anyone's shadow. Her career was not simply a dream, it was her lifeline. This contrast revealed itself in their day-to-day behavior. Elvis cherished routine, surrounding himself with friends, bodyguards, and advisors who reinforced his worldview. Ann-Margret preferred independence. She loved motorcycles, adrenaline, and pushing boundaries. To Elvis, that thrill-seeking nature was irresistible, but it also threatened the order he valued. He once remarked to friends that she was just like him inside, yet that likeness unsettled him. Seeing himself reflected in her boldness was exhilarating, but it was also a reminder of his own contradictions. Observers noticed the dynamic immediately. In public, they appeared inseparable. Behind the scenes, though, conversations sometimes turned into quiet disputes. Ann-Margret wanted to keep climbing, taking roles that showed her versatility as an actress and dancer. Elvis, locked into a cycle of formulaic films arranged by Colonel Tom Parker, grew frustrated at the limitations of his own career. Her rising success contrasted painfully with his cinematic struggles, and this silent competition began to wear on them both. Another difference was in how they handled the press. Ann-Margret, though charismatic, knew how to control her image carefully. She played into the comparisons to Elvis without letting them define her entirely. Elvis, on the other hand, grew increasingly irritated when the press suggested she was his female counterpart. It was one thing to share the stage with her, but it was another to hear whispers that she was stealing some of his spotlight. For a man already sensitive about his career, the comparisons struck a nerve. Still, the pull between them remained strong. They both loved music deeply, but even here their instincts clashed. Ann-Margret was disciplined, rehearsing meticulously, while Elvis relied more on raw instinct and natural feel. This difference was not just professional, it was symbolic of the way they lived. She chased mastery, while he leaned into charisma. Their connection was undeniable, but so was the friction. Friends later commented that their bond was like fire and gasoline. Each made the other burn brighter, but the combination risked an explosion. They could laugh, dance, and share moments of breathtaking closeness, only to find themselves at odds over ambitions, expectations, or simply the demands of their careers. The more time they spent together, the clearer it became that their likeness was both their strongest glue and their sharpest wedge. For Elvis, the idea of a partner who mirrored his wildness but also refused to bend to traditional roles created a conflict he could not resolve. For Ann-Margret, the realization that Elvis's values and commitments might one day eclipse her independence was equally troubling. What they shared was extraordinary, but what divided them was irreconcilable. Two souls had found their reflection in each other, but mirrors can sometimes reveal what we are not ready to face. And when emotions reach a boiling point, what single moment can turn private tension into public spectacle? Come with us to find out more. The vase that shattered everything. Sometimes history remembers a single object more than 1,000 whispered rumors. In this story, that object was a vase. One moment it was resting quietly in a room. The next it was hurled across space, smashing into pieces that would symbolize the unraveling of trust, secrecy, and restraint. The sound of it breaking seemed to echo far beyond the walls where it fell. The story of the shattered vase has become one of the most famous flashpoints in the tangled web between Elvis, Ann-Margret, and Priscilla. For months, whispers of an affair had circled Hollywood and beyond. Photographers had seen too much, gossip columnists had written too boldly, and insiders close to the Presley household had grown restless with the tension. But it was not until that explosive moment that speculation turned into undeniable drama. Priscilla Presley, young, beautiful, and already struggling under the strain of being engaged to the world's most desirable man, was the one who finally broke. Surrounded by evidence she could no longer ignore, she let her fury speak not in words, but in action. The vase flew, shattering into pieces that seemed to mirror the fracture in her trust. That single action told everyone present that she knew, and that she would not be silent about it anymore. What followed was not just a domestic dispute. The inner circle surrounding Elvis began to panic. Colonel Tom Parker, his ever-calculating manager, understood immediately that gossip had the power to damage Elvis's carefully cultivated image. Fans saw him as untouchable, devoted, and almost princely. If the rumors about Ann-Margret were confirmed publicly, the illusion could collapse. For Parker, it was not simply about Elvis's heart, it was about Elvis's empire. The vase incident also spread faster than expected. Word reached reporters, who seized on the drama. Even those who did not know the details sensed that cracks were forming in the Presley household. For Ann-Margret, the scandal came with heavy consequences. Though she had never publicly admitted to the affair, the timing of events and the sudden changes in her own schedule left little doubt in the minds of Hollywood insiders. The press painted her as the fiery other woman, while Priscilla became a sympathetic figure in a story of betrayal. The destruction caused by the vase was symbolic of something deeper. It was the breaking point where private emotions spilled into public awareness. Elvis himself was torn. He cared deeply for Ann-Margret, but the pressure from his fiancée, his manager, and his public was suffocating. That one shattering sound reminded him of the reality he could no longer escape. Choices had to be made. From Ann-Margret's perspective, the fallout was painful, yet strangely dignified. She withdrew, keeping her silence. Her refusal to engage in public spats or to defend herself openly added an air of mystery around her. But silence did not erase the sting of being cast in the role of the woman who threatened one of America's most idolized marriages to be. Friends later remarked that Elvis seemed more subdued after the incident, as though he knew something had been permanently broken. The fun, the secrecy, and the daring thrill of the affair had transformed into a problem too large to hide. The king of rock and roll could charm millions on stage, but behind closed doors, he had lost control of the performance. The shattering of that vase became more than just a heated outburst. It was a line drawn in time. After it, nothing between Elvis, Ann-Margret, and Priscilla could ever be quite the same. But when emotions settle and reputations hang in the balance, who truly decides the fate of a superstar, the man himself, or the people managing him from the shadows? Stay here as we reveal everything. Colonel's whisper, wedding bells roar. In Hollywood, not every love story ends with a kiss. Some end with a signature on a contract. Elvis Presley's personal life was never just his own, and by the mid-1960s, it had become clear that every choice he made was closely monitored by the man who steered his career, Colonel Tom Parker. For Parker, romance was never only about feelings. It was about timing, appearances, and the preservation of Elvis's carefully sculpted image. Behind closed doors, Parker saw the headlines about Elvis and Ann-Margret with growing concern. To him, scandal was not just embarrassing, it was dangerous business. Elvis was still Hollywood's golden commodity, with legions of female fans who clung to the fantasy that he could one day be theirs. If those fans believed Elvis had already given his heart to another fiery starlet, ticket sales and record sales might falter. To Parker, Ann-Margret was not just a woman in Elvis's life. She was a threat to the empire. It was in this climate of tension that whispers began. Parker quietly reminded Elvis of his long-standing relationship with Priscilla. She had been with him since her teenage years in Germany, and Parker considered her the safer choice. She was elegant, loyal, and less likely to upstage the king. A marriage to Priscilla would calm the gossip, protect Elvis's reputation, and reassure the fans that their idol was still respectable. Ann-Margret, on the other hand, was unpredictable, ambitious, and too similar to Elvis himself. The Colonel's whispers carried weight. He reminded Elvis that the world was watching. Hollywood was a place of shifting alliances, and Parker knew how quickly careers could tumble when scandal was left unchecked. The choice, he suggested, was clear: end the dangerous entanglement with Ann-Margret and move forward with Priscilla. By 1967, those whispers had turned into a roar. The preparations for Elvis's wedding to Priscilla were carried out with military precision. Every detail was designed to present the image of a fairy tale romance. The wedding took place in Las Vegas, a city symbolic of risk and chance, yet the event itself was scripted down to the last flower arrangement. Only a small group of guests were invited, keeping the ceremony private and controlled. Newspapers the next day painted the perfect picture. The king of rock and roll had finally settled down with his longtime love. What the public did not see was the tension beneath the surface. Elvis went through the motions, but those who knew him well sensed that he was conflicted. The ceremony was brief, almost mechanical, lasting only 8 minutes. Afterward, the reception felt more like a publicity event than a celebration. Priscilla wore her radiant smile, but Elvis's expression often betrayed a sense of resignation. For Ann-Margret, the wedding was a silent dagger. She did not attend, nor was she ever mentioned in the official press releases surrounding the event, yet she understood what had happened. Love had lost to image, and whispers had dictated the outcome. Years later, she would recall the sting of that realization, but also the respect she had for the decision Elvis made under pressure. The marriage to Priscilla was meant to end speculation, to draw a curtain over the scandal and protect Elvis's brand. For a time, it seemed to work. Fans celebrated the union, and Parker congratulated himself on saving his client's career from dangerous distractions. But beneath the polished surface, cracks were already forming. A marriage built on whispers and pressure rarely finds stability. When the curtain falls on a wedding, what survives? The vows exchanged on stage, or the unspoken bond that lingers off stage? Come along as we uncover the hidden story. From lovers to loyal ghosts. Sometimes the most enduring bonds are not defined by romance but by remembrance. After the wedding bells had faded and the public image of Elvis Presley was firmly tied to Priscilla, many assumed Ann-Margret's connection to him would disappear into the shadows of Hollywood history. Instead, something quieter, but no less powerful, took its place. Their love story transformed into a lifelong loyalty, marked not by scandal, but by gestures that spoke volumes. Elvis never completely closed the door on Ann-Margret. Even after their romantic chapter ended, he made sure she felt his presence. Before her Las Vegas performances, she would often receive elaborate bouquets delivered to her dressing room. The flowers arrived without fail, year after year, a silent reminder that she was still in his thoughts. It was never a grand public declaration, but rather a private language only they fully understood. To Ann-Margret, those flowers became more than gifts. They were symbols of a bond that refused to die, even when marriage and distance stood between them. Ann-Margret reciprocated in her own way. She chose silence over scandal, refusing to speak openly about their past while Elvis was alive. Hollywood is a place where secrets rarely stay hidden, but she carried hers with grace. Her decision to remain discreet was not out of fear but out of respect for Elvis, for his family, and for the life he had chosen. This discretion only deepened the aura of mystery around their connection. When Elvis's health began to decline in the 1970s, Ann-Margret remained one of the few people from his past who stood by him without judgment. She never distanced herself for the sake of her own career or image. Instead, she remained steadfast, offering friendship where others offered gossip. It was this quiet loyalty that marked their relationship as something unique in the volatile world of fame. The most striking moment of this loyalty came in 1977, after the shocking news of Elvis's death. Ann-Margret did not hesitate. She traveled to Memphis, walking through the gates of Graceland to attend the funeral. Those who were present that day recalled the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, the sorrow etched into her face, and the weight of the unspoken history between them. She was not there as a co-star, nor as a former lover, but as someone who had shared a rare and enduring bond with the king of rock and roll. At the funeral, while crowds mourned loudly, Ann-Margret's grief was personal and private. She avoided the spotlight, standing silently among those closest to Elvis. For her, it was not about being seen, but about being present. It was a final gesture of loyalty to the man she had once loved and always respected. Those near her noticed she did not try to speak or draw attention. Her presence alone told the story of a connection that had survived time, distance, and silence. Even in later years, when Ann-Margret began to open up slightly about their connection, her words were always measured, never sensationalized. She spoke of Elvis with warmth, describing him as a man who had left a permanent mark on her soul. She never indulged in scandalous details, nor did she diminish the complexity of what they had shared. Her loyalty extended beyond his life, becoming a part of her legacy as much as her own acting career. It was as if, through her words and her silence, she ensured that their story would be remembered not as gossip, but as a testament to respect and enduring affection. The transformation from passionate lovers to devoted friends, and finally to loyal ghosts in each other's stories, is what makes their connection so unforgettable. It was a relationship that defied easy categorization, slipping beyond the confines of Hollywood gossip into something deeper, almost spiritual. But loyalty often comes at a cost. When someone chooses silence and respect, what sacrifices are hidden beneath that decision? Let us tell you. The man she chose over the king. Not every story of love is about passion that burns uncontrollably. Some are about choosing calm over fire. For Ann-Margret, that choice came in the form of a man named Roger Smith, an actor best known for his role in the television series 77 Sunset Strip. Unlike Elvis Presley, whose life was a whirlwind of music, adoration, and chaos, Roger offered something entirely different: stability. Their romance began quietly. Ann-Margret had grown weary of the constant speculation that surrounded her connection with Elvis, and Roger entered her life as someone who brought a sense of order to the storm. He was charming, attentive, and above all, dependable. On their third date, she later admitted she already knew she would marry him. It was a decision that startled even her closest friends. After all, she was one of the most glamorous women in Hollywood, pursued by the biggest names in the industry. Yet she placed her bet on a man who valued family, steadiness, and a more private life. The wedding between Ann-Margret and Roger in 1967 was the opposite of spectacle. There were no newspaper headlines crafted to sell a fairy tale romance, no carefully staged photographs for the public. Instead, it was a deeply personal ceremony, attended by those closest to them. For Ann-Margret, it marked a new chapter, not one defined by scandal or speculation, but by choice and conviction. Roger's devotion soon became evident in ways that shocked many in Hollywood. When Ann-Margret suffered a devastating fall during a 1972 performance in Lake Tahoe, she was left with severe injuries, including a fractured jaw and facial trauma. It was Roger who stood by her bedside, managing her recovery, guiding her through the painful process of healing, and refusing to let her career slip away. He became not only her husband but also her manager, dedicating himself fully to her well-being. In a city where marriages often collapsed under far lighter pressures, theirs grew stronger through hardship. Ann-Margret often spoke of Roger as her anchor. While the world remembered her as the fiery redhead who danced alongside Elvis, she insisted that Roger was the man who gave her life structure and security. He was protective, sometimes fiercely so, taking control of business decisions and keeping her away from situations that might have threatened her stability. Critics sometimes called him controlling, but Ann-Margret never saw it that way. To her, he was the partner who gave her the courage to continue performing, even after injuries that might have ended her career. Their marriage lasted more than 50 years, a rarity in Hollywood where unions often dissolve in a matter of months. Through triumphs and tragedies, through Ann-Margret's enduring fame and Roger's eventual step back from acting, the two remained inseparable. She would later say that the secret to their marriage was simple: loyalty. It was the same value that had defined her bond with Elvis, but with Roger it was tested and proven across decades of shared life. The choice to marry Roger Smith was not a rejection of Elvis as a person, but of the lifestyle that came with him. Ann-Margret knew that if she had tied her life to the king, she would forever live in the shadow of his fame, his fans, and his controlling manager. With Roger, she found a space where she could be herself, not a headline, not a rumor, but a woman building a life with the man she loved. Yet even with a marriage as steadfast as hers, the ghost of Elvis never truly left her story. In interviews decades later, she admitted that some connections never fade, even when life takes you in a different direction. So, if she had stability in Roger and loyalty in her marriage, why did Elvis still linger in her heart as the man she called her soulmate? Come with us to know. At 84, the soulmate she couldn't marry. Time has a way of softening what once felt unbearable. Decades after the whirlwind of the 1960s, Ann-Margret, now in her 80s, began speaking more openly about the chapter of her life tied to Elvis Presley. For years, she had kept her silence, respecting the sanctity of her marriage and shielding her past from public spectacle. But as the years stretched on and the memories became part of history rather than scandal, she allowed herself to admit what so many had long suspected: Elvis was her soulmate. Her confession was not framed in sensational terms. Instead, it was delivered with the quiet wisdom of someone who had lived a long and reflective life. She spoke of the deep connection they shared, one that transcended ordinary romance. It wasn't about the glitter of Las Vegas, the bright lights of Hollywood, or even the tabloid scandals that once surrounded them. For Ann-Margret, it was about a sense of recognition, the feeling of seeing herself reflected in another person, flaws and brilliance alike. At 84, she acknowledged the truth without regret. She explained that soulmates do not always end up together. Life, she said, is about choices. And some choices are not about what the heart longs for, but about what allows a person to live with dignity and peace. She chose Roger Smith, the man who gave her stability. But she never denied that Elvis had been the person who stirred her soul in ways no one else ever had. Her candor revealed something profound. Being a soulmate is not the same as being a spouse. Elvis represented passion, danger, and intensity. Roger represented loyalty, healing, and permanence. Both men shaped her life, but in different ways. Ann-Margret's decision not to marry Elvis was not a rejection of him as a person, but an acceptance of the fact that their paths, no matter how intertwined, were not built for forever. In her later reflections, she also touched on the fragility of fame. Elvis, she admitted, carried a burden that few could truly understand. His life was dictated by a combination of adoring fans, controlling advisors, and endless obligations. Ann-Margret knew that if she had joined him in that world as his wife, she would have been swallowed by the same machine. Their love might have burned brightly, but it also might have destroyed them both. By stepping away, she preserved not only herself, but also the purity of what they had shared. For fans who had long wondered why she never married him, her words at 84 finally gave clarity. It was not about lack of love, it was about too much love, and the recognition that some flames are too powerful to survive the weight of daily life. Her honesty resonated deeply because it was not cloaked in bitterness. She did not frame their story as a tragedy, but as a gift. Elvis had been a part of her, a piece of her history that shaped her forever. The tenderness of her confession showed that even half a century later, Elvis was still with her. In the laughter she remembered, in the flowers that once arrived at her door, in the songs that carried echoes of their bond, he remained. She did not need marriage to validate that connection. The title of soulmate was enough. Which part of Ann-Margret's confession surprised you most? Calling Elvis her soulmate, choosing stability over passion, or the hidden reason they never married? Share your thoughts below.